Hey guys, this is Paul, and this is the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3. I think most people can agree that this phone looks really cool. It has a really neat design, it's flashy, it's fun to show off to friends, but beyond that appeal, does this phone still compete with other flagships at the $1,000 price point? What are the pros and cons that come with a phone that flips like this? And I think the biggest question that needs to be answered with the Flip 3 is it practical? That's what I'm gonna answer in this review, so let's get right into it. The design of the Flip 3 is so refreshing to see in today's age of smartphones. So I just love this clamshell design. I know a lot of people are quick to compare it to the classic Motorola Razr phones, or even the new Motorola Razr phone that the Flip 3 is competing with, but it reminds me the most of the old Game Boy SPs, if you remember those. And the flipping mechanism works really well. It feels very sturdy, the whole design of this phone feels pretty rugged, and the hinge has the perfect amount of resistance so that it doesn't move when you don't want it to, but it's still easy enough to open and close with one hand if you need to do so. And when it's closed, it's really nice and compact, so it's super easy to fit in pockets. Another eye-catching feature of the Flip 3 is this outer display, which Samsung calls the cover display. Now, visually speaking, for a secondary display, this thing looks great. It's pretty sharp and gets bright enough even outdoors, but in real world use, it has pretty minimal functionality. I think there's only like 6 widgets to choose from, but I do enjoy using it for controlling my music and glancing at notifications without having to open my phone. I basically use this display similar as to how I use a smartwatch. But definitely the most useful feature of the outer display is how you're able to use it as a viewfinder to take selfies with the rear-facing camera. You just double-click the power button and you're able to see yourself and take photos and videos. This is actually really useful because the rear camera is higher quality than the normal selfie camera, so if you're someone who takes a lot of selfies, this is definitely a nice feature to have. And you also get some software integration that takes advantage of the folding display. Take the YouTube app, for example. If you bend the display, it will put the video player on the top half of the screen and the description and comments on the bottom half. And if you're in the Gallery app, your pictures become visible on the top half and you get touch controls on the bottom half. Now, I wouldn't say these are particularly useful. I don't really see the purpose of splitting the display up like that for those apps, but there are other instances where it works really well. One that I found really useful was for video calling. So if you're on a call, you can just bend the phone and set it down and it'll show the call on the top half of the screen, so you don't have to hold the phone the entire time or find something to prop it up against like you would have to do with normal phones. And similarly, this works really well in the normal camera app for taking selfies or filming yourself. The phone sort of doubles as its own stand or tripod, and you can take advantage of this with both the front and the rear cameras. When the Flip 3 is open like this, you can almost think of it as your normal flagship smartphone, which is great because I think that's kind of the goal of a phone that flips like this. You have a 6.7-inch OLED display that has an adaptive refresh rate up to 120 Hz, so scrolling and animations on this phone look silky smooth. It's a really nice display. This phone also has plenty of power to work with. Just like the S21 and S21 Plus, it has the same Snapdragon 888 chip inside and 8 GB of RAM, and I've had no issues with performance. It also manages to pack in Face Unlock and Fingerprint Unlock on the power button. Even the camera experience is very similar to what you'd find on the S21 and S21 Plus, except for the missing telephoto lens that I'll talk about later. But you'll still get great photos from the 12 megapixel wide and ultra wide lenses, and they have that classic, slightly overprocessed Samsung look to them. Interestingly, I did find that low light performance wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped. Normally, I prefer Samsung's low light photos over my iPhone, but not with the Flip 3. 4K video looked pretty good as well. It was sharp, autofocus was fast, and the stabilization looked great. Okay, so this phone is just about right in line with other flagships in terms of features, and it flips, and it's just $1,000. It might be sounding pretty great so far, but there are a few issues that are mostly just inevitable consequences of the folding design. So a pretty obvious one is the crease that runs right through the middle of the phone when the phone is opened up. I can easily see and feel that ridge while scrolling through an article or something like that. Although I have to say, after a couple weeks of use, I barely even think about it anymore. So I wouldn't really consider this a reason not to get the Flip. It's just one of the trade-offs that come with a foldable display. And another trade-off is durability. So the Flip 3 has just an IPX8 rating, which means that mild water submersion probably won't be an issue, but it doesn't have any dust resistance rating. That's what the X in IPX8 means. So considering that, you might want to avoid going to the beach with the Flip 3 where sand could get stuck in the hinge, or maybe you work in construction or landscaping where there are a lot of dust particles. Basically, any environments like that, I would be somewhat concerned about the lack of dust resistance on this phone. The Flip 3 also does not have a telephoto lens as part of its camera system. It just has a regular wide-angle lens and then an ultra-wide. This really isn't a big deal to me. I rarely use a telephoto lens even when it is available to use, but if you're always zooming in to take photos, this might not be the phone for you. And then there's the big one. Battery life. So just listen to this. The Z Flip 3 has about 10% more pixels than the S21 Plus because of its taller display, but it has about a 40% smaller battery capacity. That makes for very weak battery life compared to other phones at this price point. I would guess I get around 3.5 to 4.5 hours on an average day. Now you could probably get that up to 4 to 5 hours by disabling the 120 Hz display in settings, but that would sacrifice one of the flagship features of this phone. So that's one of my main disclaimers to anybody thinking about purchasing this phone. If you're a heavy user, you will need to charge this up throughout the course of a day. Thankfully, it does support fast charging at 15 watts and wireless charging at 10 watts. So if you're someone who has chargers everywhere at all times, maybe the battery issue won't be too bad. But regardless, that is probably this phone's biggest weakness. So at this point, I've gone over most of the pros and cons of the Flip 3, but I still have to answer the lingering question, is it practical? And I think the answer for most people is yes. The Fold manages to pull off its unique design without sacrificing most key aspects of a flagship smartphone in 2021, like a beautiful high refresh rate display, a solid camera setup, and flagship specs under the hood. I think it's safe to say the Fold 3 is not just another gimmick phone, and if you can look past the poor battery life, this could definitely be a daily driver for most people. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.